Let's now summarize and review some of the commands we've been seeing that's going to help us troubleshoot InterVLAN routing issues, be it on a layer 2 switch or a multi-layer switch. We talked about how on a layer 2 switch, the way that we could route between a couple of different VLANs on that switch was to use a router on a trunk configuration. And we took a look at a few issues that could arise if we didn't have that configured correctly. We want to make sure that we've got matching VLAN identifiers on the sub interfaces on our router, which we could use on the router, the show interfaces, and then we would look for the sub interface. We could on the switch, we could look at what I'd probably do a show VLAN here to make sure that my VLANs were created. I might do a show interface trunk on the switch to make sure the VLANs were allowed on that trunk. We also talked about making sure that encapsulation types matched up. We can go to the router interface again and make sure that we're specifying .1Q. And we go back to the switch and make sure that that trunk is configured for .1Q. Again, the show interfaces trunk command will show us what is the trunk encapsulation that this trunk is using. We want to make sure the VLANs are created. Show VLAN brief on the switch will help us out with that. We also talked about if we had a multi-layer switch, we could group together or we could have several ports grouped together in the same VLAN and still route between any of those ports and some other VLAN. And the way that was possible was we had this SVI, this switch virtual interface, which was, I think of it as the representative for all the ports making up that VLAN. Let's say I had VLAN 200. I've got a bunch of devices connected to different ports that belong to VLAN 200, and I've got an interface, an SVI, that I configured using the command interface VLAN 100 or 200 or whatever VLAN I said, and we can go into that SVI and we can give an IP address. It's the representative. It's in charge of routing to and from devices in that VLAN. If it's not working correctly, we might not have the correct VLAN ID specified. When we said interface VLAN 100, maybe it should have been interface VLAN 200. We need to go back and maybe undo that and correct that. Also, once we go into interface configuration mode for the SVI, we need to have an appropriate IP address. Remember, there's a correlation, there's a relationship between a VLAN and a subnet, an address space. Let's look at our design documentation and make sure that the IP address that we're assigning to our SVI, let's make sure it's in the right subnet. And we also considered routed ports. This is where we go into a switch and tell a port that you're not a switch port, you're not a member of a VLAN, you're going to act like a router interface. We go in and we say no switch port. And if we're not sure what mode we're running in, we did this one for you live. Show interfaces, followed by the interface identifier, followed by the keyword of switch port. And that's going to tell us, are we enabled for switch port operation or not? We want to say no switch port to make this into a routed port. And then we can give an IP address that needs to be part of the correct VLAN or the correct subnet. Again, let's check our design documentation for that. And finally, we discussed ether channel, layer 3 ether channel troubleshooting. We said that we could do a show ether channel summary command, and that would show us, it showed us several things. It showed us the port channel identifier. We were using port channel 1. Also, we could see that we were using PAGP as opposed to LACP, and we could see the ports that were members of this ether channel.